I am honored and incredibly privileged to introduce my friend Glenn Beck, the busiest man on God's green earth. Glenn began life in circumstances that would crush most of us, and almost did him. And he has gone on to become one of the most successful and important political figures of our era. He is a major force in American media, the host of top-ranked radio and television shows that have reached millions of listeners and viewers. He's the author of 6 New York Times bestsellers in both fiction and nonfiction, and the organizer of unprecedented mass demonstrations in Washington to restore hope for our country, and in Jerusalem to declare his solidarity with the Jewish state as its citizens are threatened with a second Holocaust by their Islamic enemies. As the organizer of the 9/12 movement and March on Washington, Beck is the real creator of the American Tea Party, the most important development in conservatism in our era, and in many ways, the last best hope for America's future. He is currently in the process of launching Glenn Beck TV and Mercury Enterprises, a media complex which is designed to break the virtual monopoly of the left on American audiences, a monopoly that exerts itself either through direct control of media channels like MSNBC or through vicious attacks on advertisers who provide sponsorship for conservative programs like Glenn Beck's on Fox. Glenn has been the target of the most vicious attacks of which the left is capable. He has been ridiculed and derided. His sanity has been questioned and his character has been assaulted. He has been called racist, sexist, Islamophobic, and every other term the verbal assassins of the left regularly invoke to destroy the conservatives they fear the most. Like many other targets of the left, he has also been attacked by Republican elitists in Washington, and in identical terms, nutcase, reactionary, conspiracy theorist, extremist. These are the words these elitists have used to describe him. Call it the Stockholm Syndrome. It is a crippling disease of the Republican Party and of elements in the conservative movement. To seek the approval of one's enemies by attacking one's friends, to treat one's enemies as misguided friends, to be polite and courteous to people who want to slit your throat. Let me tell you a personal story that will illuminate the problem. 25 years ago, I was a recent refugee from the left and had begun addressing conservative audiences. One of my first invitations came from the Cardinal Mindszenty Foundation in St. Louis, named after a famous hero of the anti-communist struggle during the Cold War. I had been a leader of the New Left, a Marxist, a self-styled revolutionary, a small c communist, and a large A anti-American. But when my conservative host introduced me, he said, "This is David Horowitz, who was a former civil rights worker and peace activist." It is not just that my conservative host was too polite to notice that I had been a self-declared enemy of our country and of people like himself. It is that conservatives either do not want to believe that this country has enemies among its own citizens, or do not want to be seen by the New York Times and the Washington Post as believing that this country has enemies within. This is how Barack Obama got elected to the White House. All Republicans allowed themselves to see was a community organizer, a civil rights worker and peace activist. All they saw was a progressive. And that is what socialist, radical, pro-jihadist, and anti-American activists call themselves today, progressives. My parents were card-carrying members of the Communist Party and wanted the Soviet enemy to win the Cold War. But they always referred to themselves as progressives. When the Communist Party ran a candidate for president in 1948, the party they created for the job was called the Progressive Party. Actually, Henry Wallace, I hadn't thought of this before, was the Joe Biden of his day. He's a former Democrat vice president. This was a ruse to hide their real agendas. Progressive was a good old American thing to be. And 50 years later, conservatives were still buying it hook, line, and sinker, until the arrival of Glenn Beck. What distinguishes Glenn Beck, what makes him such a game-changing force in the struggle for America's future, is that he has deconstructed the word progressive, put his finger on the enemy, named him, and won't let him go. That is why Glenn Beck is marked for slaughter by the left. It is also why conservative elitists in Washington are desperate to disown him, because his message is discomforting, and because the heart of his message is an unpleasant truth. Until Glenn Beck came along, ex-radicals like myself were endlessly frustrated by conservatives' refusal to look at history, refusal to connect the dots, refusal to understand that these are not idealists, but dedicated, anti-capitalist, anti-liberty, and anti-American crusaders who number in the millions. That they are financed by anti-American billionaires like George Soros and left-wing foundations, billionaire foundations like the Tides Foundation and the Ford Foundation, and communist unions like the SEIU, and criminal organizations like Acorn, and that they are part of an international socialist left which supports our Islamist enemies in the Middle East and Asia. Former radicals like myself who knew these people up close and personal spent years in the conservative wilderness, beside ourselves with frustration as we watched conservatives call communists and socialists and anti-American radicals liberals and misguided idealists. And then along came Glenn Beck. Before an audience of millions, Glenn Beck began to connect the dots and restore the history and describe the real agendas of the leftist movement and its cynical deceptions and its monumental crimes. Beck saw that the link between the anarchists and the radicals, the socialists and the liberals, lay in the very term progressive. Progressivism is the religious idea that history is moving in a positive direction, that it is within the political power of human beings, within the power of political activists and governments to remake the entire world and bring about a paradise of social justice. They believe that the way to do this is by increasing the power of government until the state is able to compel every man, woman, and child to be just and good and environmentally friendly and healthy. In a word, progressive. But you cannot compel human beings to be just and good without abolishing their individual freedom. This is the essence of the totalitarian idea, and it is the progressive idea. This is the truth that Glenn Beck has brought to millions of Americans. This is why leftists hate him and attack him, and why conservative elitists want to disown him. In 2011, Glenn Beck spoke to the most important conservative gathering in Washington. During his speech, he wrote the word progressivism on a blackboard and said, "This is the disease. Progressivism is the cancer in America, and it is eating our Constitution." And conservatives attacked him. Not the grassroots conservatives at the CPAC conference, but the elitist conservatives at the Weekly Standard. The Weekly Standard said that what Beck had written on that blackboard was nonsense and conspiratorial and tangential to the political realities of our day. Those are quotes. Tangential to the political realities of our day. No. The conservative elitists have it exactly wrong. The threat from progressives is the political reality of our day. Our nation and its institutions are under siege. Obamaism is not a mistaken policy or several mistaken policies carried out by civil rights workers and peace activists. It is the latest incarnation of a 200-year-old movement to destroy the American Constitution and the American economic system, what in the old days we used to proudly call, or others used to proudly call, the American way of life. Glenn Beck has been teaching this to millions and millions of Americans, to Tea Party activists and Joe Sixpacks. He has been naming the enemy and revealing his agendas. He has taken on the dragons of American socialism and international socialism, which have penetrated the heart and brain of the Democratic Party. And he has documented their unholy alliances with Islamic jihadists and America's secular totalitarian enemies. Glenn Beck is the most prominent voice of freedom in the face of the tyranny at our door. He is a champion of the Jews and their fragile democracy in the face of a second Nazi Holocaust currently being organized by rabid Islamists and their progressive friends. He is a man of formidable personal courage under relentless personal attack, an indispensable leader to millions of conservatives who believe in America and who want its glories to continue. I am not a man given to prayer, but if I were, the person whose safety and whose health I would be praying for daily, for the sake of my children and my friends and my country, would be this man, this great American, Glenn Beck.
Thank you. David, if you don't mind, I have a box underneath my desk that I put some of my notes and put some of the stories and some of my thoughts in, and some things I keep records for my children. Because when I started this, I met with my older children who are now in college. And I said, this is going to change our family. And the only thing that I care about is that you remember who I am. And if you don't mind, I'd like to take and put what you just said about me in that box so they may remember. Thank you. Meaningful, thank you. As for you,